The earring was a small thing, a single pearl set in gold filigree, no larger than a pea, the kind of ornament a woman might wear to a private supper and forget she had worn it all. It had lodged itself between the bolster and the headboard, pressed into the seam of linen where the fabric tucked beneath the mattress, and it might have remained there for weeks had Dawes not stripped the bed that morning with her usual thoroughness. She held it up to the light from the window, turned it once, then carried it to where Maud sat at the dressing table brushing her hair. "This was caught in the bedclothes, Your Grace." Maud took it without looking away from the mirror. She set it on the marble surface beside her hairbrush, next to the small porcelain dish where she kept her own earrings each night, two garnets in plain settings that had belonged to her mother. She continued brushing, long, even strokes, beginning at the crown and drawing down through the full weight of her hair, which was dark and heavy and still loosened from sleep. "Thank you, Dawes. That will be all for now." The maid hesitated, one beat no more, and then withdrew. She closed the door behind her with the particular care of a woman who has understood something she was not meant to see. Maud looked at the earring in the mirror's reflection. A pearl, not hers. She owned no pearls. Her jewelry was modest by any measure, and entirely known to her. The garnets, a cameo brooch her father had given her upon her marriage, a thin gold chain she wore on Sundays. The contents of her jewel case could be catalogued in under a minute, and this earring was not among them. She picked it up, held it between her thumb and forefinger. It was warm still from where it had lain against the linen, and the gold was fine, finer than anything she owned. The setting was fashionable, recent, the work of a London jeweler, not a country one. She set it back down beside her hairbrush and resumed her strokes. She had suspected for some time. Not because Lawrence had been careless, quite the opposite. He had been careful in the way only a guilty man is careful, the kind of attentiveness that does not arise from affection, but from management. He had begun asking after her schedule, not because he wished to join her, but because he wished to know where she would be and when she would not be in certain rooms. He had taken to locking his study, which he had never done in the first 18 months of their marriage. He had, on 3 occasions that she could recall, changed his coat before coming to dinner, not because the first had been soiled, but because it had carried something on it he did not wish her to detect. A scent, a thread of color that did not belong to this house. She had noticed all of it. She had said nothing. Their marriage was 2 years old, and it functioned the way a well-maintained clock functions, with precision, without warmth, and with a faint ticking awareness that something inside it was wound too tight. They dined together most evenings when he was not in London. They exchanged remarks about the weather, the progress of the new drainage works in the lower fields, the health of the Dowager and Bath. They retired to separate ends of the drawing-room after supper, she to her needlework or her letters, he to his newspapers or his port. On the nights he came to her bedchamber, it was brief and purposeful, and he left before the candle on his side had burned to the first ring. She had not expected passion. She had been 23 and without fortune when Sir Alister Carew, her father, had negotiated the match, a second daughter with good teeth and adequate French, offered to a duke who needed a wife the way one needs a new roof, not with desire, but with the recognition that the thing must be done before winter. Lawrence Deverell, 5th Duke of Harleston, had examined her across a drawing-room in Mayfair, found nothing objectionable, and made his offer within the week. She had accepted because there was nothing else to accept, and because her father's debts had made the alternative, another season, another year of genteel insufficiency, unbearable. She had expected civility and had received it. She had expected distance and had received that too. What she had not expected was the particular cruelty of being made comfortable enough to forget she was unhappy, and then reminded of it by a pearl earring that was not hers. The door opened. She heard his boots on the floor, the measured step he took each morning when he came to her rooms before breakfast. A ritual that had begun in the first month and continued without interruption, not because he wished to see her, but because it was the sort of thing a duke did with his duchess before descending to the dining room. The performance of a functioning marriage. "Good morning," he said. He was already dressed. His cravat was tied in the style his valet preferred, clean, precise, without ostentation. He smelled of soap and the faintest edge of tobacco from his study. "Good morning," she replied. She did not turn from the mirror. She drew the brush through her hair again, watching his reflection appear behind her. Tall, composed, his hands clasped behind his back in the posture of a man surveying his property. She picked up the earring. held it between two fingers, examining it in the light with the mild curiosity one might direct at a button found between sofa cushions. And then she said it. "I found her earring in our bed." The words were conversational. She said them the way she might have said the farrier's coming at 11, or Mrs. Elling mentioned the chimney in the east parlor needs sweeping. There was no inflection, no tremor, no accusation curled inside the vowels. She said it while looking at the earring, not at him, and then she set it down on the marble beside her garnets and resumed brushing her hair. In the mirror, she watched the Duke stop breathing. It was not a figure of speech. His chest arrested mid-rise. His lips, which had been parted to deliver whatever pleasantry he had prepared, likely a remark about the weather, which was fine, or the post, which had arrived early, remained open without sound. His hands, still clasped behind his back, tightened until the knuckles whitened. He did not move. He did not speak. For a span of perhaps 4 seconds, the 5th Duke of Harleston became a man made entirely of stone, and the only sound in the room was the whisper of bristle through hair. Maud continued brushing. She was waiting. Not for an apology. She had no use for apologies, which were merely the sounds men made when they wished to be forgiven without having changed. She was waiting to see what kind of man he decided to be in this moment, whether he would lie, whether he would deflect, whether he would do the thing so many men of his station did, which was to treat the discovery not as his failure, but as her indelicacy in mentioning it. "Maud," he said at last. His voice was hoarse. He had found breath again, but only barely, and the word came out as if it had been pulled from somewhere deeper than his throat. "Yes?" He stopped. She watched his reflection swallow. His eyes had moved to the earring on the marble. He was staring at it the way a man stares at evidence presented in a courtroom, not with surprise, but with the slow, sickening recognition that the thing he had believed hidden was, and had perhaps always been, in full view. "It is a pretty thing," Maud said, still brushing. "A pearl, rather fine. I do not own any pearls, as you may recall." He said nothing. She had not expected him to. The silence was its own confession, and she let it fill the room the way water fills a basin, steadily, without mercy, until there was no space left for pretense. She set down the brush, gathered her hair, and began pinning it herself. Dawes would normally have done this, but Dawes had been dismissed and would not return until called. She worked with the unhurried competence of a woman who has dressed her own hair before and does not require assistance, though assistance has been provided. She placed each pin with care. She did not rush. "I will not ask you who she is," she said, addressing his reflection. "I suspect I already know, though it does not matter to me greatly. What matters is that it happened here, in this room, in our bed. You understand the distinction." He understood. She could see that he understood because the color had left his face entirely, and his hands had dropped to his sides, no longer clasped but hanging, as if the posture of authority had deserted him along with everything else. "I'm going down to breakfast," she said. She rose from the dressing table. She was wearing a morning dress of pale gray muslin, high-waisted, long-sleeved, buttoned to the throat with small covered buttons, the kind of dress that announced nothing except competence and self-possession. She crossed the room, paused at the door, and looked at him directly for the first time since he had entered. "You may keep the earring," she said, "or return it. That's your affair." She went down to breakfast alone. She ate toast and drank her chocolate and read a letter from her sister Phoebe, who was expecting her 3rd child in Hertfordshire and wanted advice about names. She replied in her head, "Frances if a girl," after their mother, and buttered another piece of toast. Mrs. Elling came in to discuss the week's menus, and Maud approved them without alteration because the menus were sound, and because maintaining the ordinary machinery of the household was the only act available to her that did not involve either weeping or breaking something, and she intended to do neither. Lawrence did not come to breakfast. She had not expected him to. He did not appear until nearly noon, when she saw him from the morning room window crossing the gravel toward the stables. He was dressed for riding, though she knew, with the certainty that comes from 2 years of quiet observation, that he was not going for exercise. He was going because a man who cannot face his wife must face his horse, and a horse will not ask him what kind of man he intends to be. She returned to her needlework. She was stitching a cushion cover for the library, a pattern of ivy and small birds that she had designed herself, and that pleased her more than most things in this house. The stitching required concentration, which was useful, because concentration kept her hands from trembling and her mind from settling on the image that had presented itself unbidden when she first held the earring to the light. Another woman's head on her pillow, Another woman's hair spread across linen that Maud herself had chosen. Another woman's laughter in a room where Maud slept alone on the nights he did not come to her. She completed 3 birds and half a length of ivy before the trembling stopped. He was gone for 3 hours. When he returned, she heard his boots in the hall, heard him speak briefly to Ridley about a matter concerning the tenants at Barrow Farm, heard his study door close. She did not go to him. She had said what needed saying, and the rest was his to carry. The days that followed were a study in surfaces. They continued to dine together. They continued to exchange remarks about the post, the drainage works, the weather. But the architecture of their politeness had shifted. A wall had been removed, and though the structure still stood, they could both feel the draft where the wall had been. He watched her now. She could feel his gaze following her across rooms, settling on her hands when she poured the tea, resting on her face when she spoke to Mrs. Elling about the linen closets. He was looking at her the way a man looks at a painting he has passed every day for 2 years, and suddenly realized that he has never actually seen. She did not acknowledge the looking. She went about her duties, the household accounts, the correspondence, the small decisions about flowers and menus and candle orders that constituted the daily governance of Harleston Park. She met with Ridley on Tuesday mornings to review the estate ledgers, as she had done since the first autumn of her marriage, when she had discovered that the previous system of record-keeping was 3 months behind and organized by no principle she could discern. She oversaw the kitchen garden through the gardener, approved repairs to the tenant cottages through the steward, and managed the household staff with the quiet efficiency that Mrs. Elling had once described, in an unguarded moment, as a blessing from the Almighty after the chaos of the previous Duke's bachelorhood. She did all of this, as she had always done it. The only difference was that she no longer left her dressing table drawer open, and she no longer set out 2 cups when she took her morning chocolate in case he might join her. Small withdrawals, the kind a man might not notice for days or weeks, until the cumulative absence of small warmths became its own weather. He noticed sooner than she expected. It was a Thursday, 10 days after the earring, and she was in the library replacing the flowers when he found her. She was standing at the side table with her shears, trimming the stems of white roses she had cut from the south garden, arranging them in the blue and white vase that had stood in this spot since his grandmother's time. She heard him enter but did not turn, because the stems required her attention, and because she had grown accustomed to continuing with tasks when he appeared, rather than dropping everything to face him, as she had done in the early months when she still believed his arrivals meant something. Maud. "The roses are early this year," she said, snipping a stem at an angle. "Ridley says the mild winter. I'm inclined to agree." "Maud, I ended it." She set down the shears. She sat down. She did not turn immediately. She placed the last rose in the vase, adjusted its position, and then stood with her hands resting on the edge of the table, looking at the arrangement. It was a good arrangement, balanced. The white against the blue porcelain had a clarity to it that pleased her. "Her name is Lady Portia Selwyn," he said behind her. His voice was stripped. She had never heard him speak without the veneer of composure, and the sound of it, raw, unvarnished, almost rough, was so unfamiliar that for a moment she was not certain it was him. "The widow of Sir Marcus Selwyn. She resides in London, and I have written to her this morning to say that it is finished, entirely, without condition." "I did not ask for her name," Maud said. She turned to face him. He was standing in the doorway, not inside the room, as if he did not have the right to enter it, and he looked, for the first time since she had known him, like a man who was not certain of his ground. His cravat was slightly askew. His hair, usually immaculate, showed the evidence of a hand drawn through it more than once. "I know you did not ask," he said. "I'm telling you because you deserve to know what has been done, and because I find that I cannot—" He stopped, pressed his lips together. "I cannot bear the way you look at me now, as if I am a piece of furniture you have decided to tolerate." "You were the one who decided what I was," she said quietly. "A roof to be repaired before winter. I believe those were the terms, if not the words." It struck him. She saw it land, not as anger, but as recognition, the way a man recognizes his own handwriting on a document he does not remember signing. He had never said those words to her, but he had lived them, and she had felt the shape of them in every careful, courteous, empty exchange they had shared for 2 years. "Yes," he said. "Those were the terms? And Lady Selwyn was, what? The hearth you actually wished to sit beside?" "She was a failure of character," he said. "Mine, not yours, never yours." Maud looked at him for a long moment. She was aware of the roses behind her, their scent clean and sharp, filling the space between them. She was aware of the light coming through the library windows, which was the pale gold of late morning in June, falling across the carpet in long oblique bars. She was aware that this was the most honest he had ever been with her, and that honesty, arriving 2 years late, is a thing one does not know how to hold. "I do not want your guilt," she said. "Guilt is a leash. It will make you resent me inside a year." "Then tell me what you want." She considered this. She had been asked so few questions in this marriage that the muscles required to answer honestly had nearly atrophied. What she wanted was not simple. It could not be delivered in a single gesture or resolved by a single letter to a woman in London. What she wanted was to be known, not managed, not maintained, not housed and clothed and occasionally visited in the night as if she were a duty on a calendar. She wanted to be seen with the same attention she gave to the roses, the accounts, the arrangement of every room in this house that she had made beautiful while he was not looking. "I want you to learn what kind of tea I drink," she said. He blinked. Of all the things he had expected, anger, conditions, perhaps a demand to visit her sister in Hertfordshire, this was not among them. "You do not know," she said. "In 2 years you have never once noticed. Mrs. Elling knows. Dawes knows. The kitchen maid who has been here 4 months knows. You do not." "Maud, it is not about the tea, Lawrence. It is about what the tea represents. You have shared a house with me for 2 years, and you do not know what I drink, what I read, what I stitch, what flowers I cut for which rooms, or why I replaced the curtains in the east parlor last autumn. You do not know these things because you have never been in the room with me. You have been in the room beside me, which is a different thing entirely, and I have been too willing to accept the difference." She picked up her shears. She was not finished with the roses. There was a second vase for the morning room, and the stems would not trim themselves. "You may begin whenever you like," she said, "or not at all. But I will not pretend any longer that this house is full when it is not." He left the library without another word. She trimmed the remaining stems and carried the second vase to the morning room herself, because the footman was attending to the silver, and because she had always preferred to place the flowers with her own hands, however much she knew a duchess ought not to. That evening, a cup of tea appeared on her side table in the drawing-room after supper. It was chamomile. She drank Darjeeling, but it was there, placed on the saucer she preferred, the blue Wedgwood with the gold rim, and beside it was a small folded note in his handwriting. It read, "I asked Mrs. Elling. She said chamomile. I suspect she was protecting your preference from me, which I deserve. I will try again tomorrow." She read the note twice. She folded it and placed it inside her workbasket beneath the silks, where she kept small things she did not wish to lose. Then she drank the chamomile, because someone had made it for her, and because it was warm, and because it was a beginning. The next morning, Darjeeling appeared at her place at breakfast before she sat down. No note this time. Just the cup, steaming, placed precisely where she always set it herself. She looked at Lawrence across the table. He was reading his newspaper. He did not look up. But the corner of his mouth, the left corner, which he had studied across 2 years of silent breakfasts, moved by a fraction, and she understood that he had asked again, and that this time Mrs. Elling had told him the truth. The weeks that followed were not a reconciliation. They were something slower and stranger, an education. He began to observe her the way she had always observed him, with the sustained attention of a person who is learning a language they should have learnt long ago. He noticed that she read in the window seat, not the armchair. He noticed that she arranged the library flowers on Tuesdays and the morning room flowers on Fridays. He noticed that she walked in the south garden after luncheon when the weather allowed, always the same path, always stopping at the sundial where the ivy grew thickest. And he asked Ridley, not her, not yet, but Ridley, why that particular spot. "It is where the light falls longest, Your Grace," Ridley told him. "Her Grace discovered it the first autumn." He began to sit in the same room as her in the evenings. Not beside her, that would have been too sudden, too deliberate, but in the chair nearest the fire, which was closer to her needlework table than the one he had always occupied. He brought his papers. He read. Occasionally he asked her a question, not about the weather or the post, but about what she was stitching, or what Phoebe had written, or whether the new chimney sweep Mrs. Elling had engaged was any improvement on the last. They were small questions. She answered them. And in answering, she felt something she had not felt in this marriage before. Not love, not yet. Not the kind that novels promised and reality rarely delivered, but presence. The simple, unremarkable fact of being in a room with a man who was, for the first time, actually in the room with her. She did not forgive him quickly. Forgiveness, she had learned, was not a single door, but a series of them, each requiring its own key, and some of those keys had not yet been made. There were nights when she lay alone in her bedchamber and thought of the earring, which she had placed in her jewelry box, not as a keepsake, but as a reminder, and the hurt was as fresh as the morning Dawes had found it in the sheets. There were mornings when he said something thoughtful, something that proved he had been paying attention, and she wanted to trust it, but could not, because attentiveness that arrives after betrayal wears a different face than attentiveness that was always there. But she watched him. She had always been good at watching. She watched him refuse an invitation to Lord Merredin's shooting party in September, because it coincided with the week Phoebe's baby was expected, and Maud intended to travel to Hertfordshire. He did not tell her he had refused. She learnt it from Ridley, who mentioned it in passing. And when she asked him about it, he said only that he had no great fondness for Meryton's pheasants. She watched him dismiss a letter that arrived from London in a hand she did not recognize. He brought it to her in the morning room, unopened, and set it on the table between them. "From Lady Selwyn," he said. His voice was steady. "I have not read it, and do not intend to. If you wish to open it, you may. If you wish to burn it, I will hold the candle." She looked at the letter. It was addressed in a woman's hand, elegant, assured, the kind of penmanship that spoke of good tutors and expensive ink. She picked it up, carried it to the fire, and placed it on the coals. It caught quickly. The edges curled, the wax seal darkened and bubbled, and in less than a minute it was ash. "Thank you," she said. She returned to her needlework. He returned to his papers. But something had shifted. Another door had opened, and behind it was a room she had not known was there, and it was warmer than she expected. In October, when the House of Lords reconvened and Lawrence was obliged to travel to London for the session, he wrote to her. Not the formal, perfunctory notes he had sent in previous years. A line about his arrival, a line about the debates, a line about when he expected to return, but real letters. Letters that mentioned what he had eaten and what he had read, and that the light on the Thames at 4 o'clock reminded him of the light in the South Garden at the same hour. Letters that asked after the ivy at the sundial and whether Mrs. Elling had resolved the matter of the chimney in the east parlor. Letters that closed not with his title but with his name. She wrote back. She told him about the first frost, about Alistair, her father, sending a crate of apples from Kent, about the kitchen cat who had taken to sleeping in the library and whom she had not the heart to remove. She signed her letters with her name as well, and in doing so felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for a very long time. Mrs. Elling, who had served Harleston Park for 19 years and had seen the previous Duke drink himself into an early grave and the current one nearly lose what he did not know he had, observed the change with the particular satisfaction of a woman who has kept a house standing through every kind of weather. She said nothing. She did not need to. She simply ensured that the Darjeeling was always fresh and the writing paper always stocked, and that the letters, when they arrived from London, were placed on her Grace's breakfast tray before anything else. The earring Maud kept. Not in the jewelry box. She moved it eventually to the drawer of her writing desk, wrapped in a scrap of muslin. It was not sentiment, it was not punishment, it was accuracy. She kept it because it was true, and because the marriage they were building now, slowly, deliberately, with the painstaking attention of two people constructing something they should have built from the start, deserved to be built on what was true, not on the convenient forgetting of what had come before. On the first anniversary of the earring, she thought of it that way, the anniversary of the earring, not the anniversary of the betrayal, because the earring was the thing that had been found, and the betrayal was the thing that had been ended. She came down to breakfast and found the pearl earring's companion on her plate. She stared at it. A single pearl in gold filigree, identical to the one in her desk drawer. She looked up at Lawrence, who was standing by the sideboard with his teacup, her teacup, Darjeeling, which he now poured for her each morning before she came down, without being asked and without remark. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "I had it made," he said, "by the same jeweler. I asked him to replicate the setting exactly." He paused. "They are yours now. Both of them, if you want them." She understood what he was doing. He was not erasing the earring. He was not pretending it had never existed. He was completing the pair, taking the thing that had been evidence and making it instead an offering. giving her the set, giving her ownership of the whole miserable, beautiful story. She opened the muslin in her writing desk, placed the second earring beside the first, and looked at them together. They were very fine. The pearls were luminous, slightly warm, and the gold filigree caught the light from the window in the same way it had caught the light that morning at her dressing table, when her world had been rearranged by a single small object found in the folds of linen. She put them on, both of them. She wore them down to the morning room, where Lawrence was reviewing correspondence with Ridley, and she did not mention them, and he did not mention them, but she saw his gaze move to her ears and rest there, and she saw his hand tighten around his pen, and she understood that this, the wearing of them, the choosing to wear them, was the last door, and she had opened it herself. That winter their son was born. They called him Alistair, after her father, who wept when he received the letter and could not speak about it for 3 days afterward without requiring his handkerchief. Phoebe, whose own daughter Frances had arrived in October, declared that the cousins would be inseparable, and began planning visits before the ink on the birth announcement was dry. Maud wore the pearl earrings to the christening. She wore them to every christening afterward. There would be a daughter, Phoebe Margaret, 20 months later, and a second son, Thomas, the year after that. She wore them on ordinary Tuesdays and on extraordinary ones. She wore them when she walked to the sundial in the south garden, where the light fell longest, and where Lawrence now walked with her, not because she had asked, but because he had learnt that this was where she went and he wished to be where she was. The earrings became in time simply her earrings. The staff knew them. Mrs. Elling knew the story, or enough of it. Housekeepers always know enough, and kept it to herself with the fierce discretion of a woman who has watched a house nearly break and then mend. Dawes, who had found the first earring that morning in the bedclothes, polished them each week without comment, and if her hands were especially gentle when she did so, it was because she remembered the morning she had carried a small pearl to her mistress and watched a woman hold a grenade as if it were a button. Lawrence never spoke of Lady Selwyn again, and Maud never asked. Some doors, once closed, are best left with their keys removed. What remained was what they built in the rooms that stayed open, the breakfasts, the evening hours, the slow accumulation of 1,000 small knowings that, taken together, constitute a marriage not of convenience or obligation, but of choice. On a morning some years later, an ordinary morning, neither anniversary nor occasion, Maud sat at her dressing table brushing her hair. The pearl earrings were already in. Alistair was shouting about something in the nursery above, and Frances Phoebe was singing to herself in the corridor with the determined tunelessness of a child who believes volume is melody. The light through the window was the pale gold of June, and the roses in the south garden were early again. Lawrence appeared in the doorway. He leaned against the frame, not entering, as was his habit, waiting until she invited him in, because even now, even after everything, he understood that this room was hers, and his presence in it was a gift she gave, not a right he held. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she said. "Darjeeling is on the tray." "I saw." She caught his eye in the mirror. He was looking at her, not past her, not through her, not at the general fact of her existence in a room, but at her, at the dark hair and the pearl earrings and the gray morning dress and the small, particular woman who had once held an earring to the light and waited to see what kind of man he would be. She smiled. It was a small thing, no larger than a pearl. He smiled back. And this, the ordinary morning, the tea on the tray, the children above, the roses coming early. This was the answer. Not grand. Not declared before 300 guests, or written in a letter or delivered on bended knee. Just this. A man in a doorway. A woman at her mirror. A marriage that had been broken by carelessness and mended by attention, and that held now, in its quiet way, like a pearl set in gold. They arrive here, like an earring found and finally worn, whenever they are ready.